Death at the White House, the final hours of Lincoln. April 1865. Abraham Lincoln's body lies in the East Room, but here's what's haunting. Servants are moving through every room with white cloth, covering every single mirror in the White House. Not just closing curtains, not just stopping clocks, covering mirrors. Why? Because Lincoln's face might still be trapped in the reflection. His spirit might see itself and never leave. This wasn't some presidential quirk. This was standard practice. Every Victorian household did this. The question is, what were they so afraid of? Welcome to Hearts and History. I'm here to help you fall asleep to some fascinating history tonight. Get comfortable. Dim those lights. Maybe grab a cup of tea. If you enjoy falling asleep to stories about the past, hit that subscribe button. It really helps. And leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love hearing from listeners around the world. Tonight we're diving into Victorian mourning rituals and why they covered mirrors when someone died. It's stranger than you might think. April 15th, 1865. Lincoln dies at 7:22 in the morning. Within hours, his body is transported back to the White House. The East Room is being prepared for the lying in state, and servants are already moving through the building on their solemn mission. Black fabric drapes the windows. White crepe covers every mirror. The gilded frames disappear under cloth. Those shining surfaces that had reflected presidents and diplomats, they're hidden now. No one passing through those rooms would catch their own reflection. Lincoln's face might still linger there. This wasn't unique to presidential mourning. Walk into any Victorian home after a death, and you'd see the same thing. Mirrors covered, clocks stopped, curtains drawn. The rituals began the moment someone died, before the body had even grown cold. Family or servants moved through every room with black cloth. Every reflective surface had to be hidden. Why? Because the dead spirit was still there, wandering the rooms it had known in life. And mirrors were the most dangerous temptation of all. Here's what Victorians believed. The soul of the dead person was still present. Confused, not understanding it had died. If that spirit caught a glimpse of its own reflection, it might become trapped in the mirror's silver depths, unable to move on, unable to leave. But there's another fear too. If you, still living, saw your own reflection in a mirror where someone had just died, you might be next. The mirror could claim your reflection as its next occupant, so why take chances? The cloth cost nothing. This custom crossed every cultural boundary. Ancient Greeks believed reflections captured the soul. Jewish families covered mirrors during Shiva to protect against evil spirits. German households draped anything that shone: windows, polished metal, clocks. The fear was universal because mirrors feel uncanny. That reflection is you and not you. A double that might one day refuse to obey. Victorian England absorbed all these traditions into their mourning culture, not through theology, through folk practice, through what grandmother had done. The draped mirror was more than superstition. It was a public declaration of private grief. It told every visitor this was a house of death, where different rules applied. Normal life was suspended here. The covered mirror said someone we loved has gone, and we're not ready to see our own reflections, our own proof that we're still here, and they're not. Victorian houses with shrouded mirrors were places suspended between worlds, between the life that had been and the life that would eventually resume. The shrouded reflection, Victorian mourning and its rituals. April 1865, the White House. Lincoln's body lies cold in the East Room. But before anyone could pay respects, servants moved through those rooms on a darker mission. Black fabric draped every window. White crepe covered every mirror completely. Not one shining surface left uncovered. This wasn't presidential protocol. This was standard Victorian practice whenever death visited. The moment someone died, mirrors got covered before the body grew cold. Why? Because the dead spirit was still wandering those familiar rooms, and mirrors were dangerous. Here's what they believed. The soul of the dead person was still present, wandering familiar rooms during those days between death and burial. And mirrors, with their strange ability to capture and hold images, they were traps. The spirit might glimpse its own reflection and become confused, trapped in that silver surface. A soul that saw itself in the mirror might not understand it was dead. It could linger indefinitely, unable to move on. Even worse, if you were still alive and caught your reflection in a death house mirror, you might be next to die. This fear wasn't uniquely Victorian. Ancient Greeks believed looking at your reflection could invite death, because the soul was visible in the mirror's surface, vulnerable to capture. In Germany and Belgium, they covered anything that shined after a death: windows, polished metal, clocks. Any reflective surface might trap a wandering soul. This custom existed in China, India, Madagascar, the Dominican Republic, England, Hungary, Romania. Every culture had the same uncanny feeling that a reflection is both you and not you, a double that might refuse to obey. In Jewish tradition, covering mirrors during Shiva has been practiced for centuries. The Kabbalists had vivid explanations. When a soul departs, it leaves a void, an emptiness prone to being filled by dark forces. The house of mourning became a magnet for evil spirits. Rabbi Yonatan Eberschutz warned that spirits could enter reflections during Shiva, attaching themselves to mourners. But there were practical reasons too. You can't worship standing directly in front of a mirror. It looks like you're bowing to yourself. Plus, mirrors represented vanity during grief. Victorian England absorbed all these traditions into their mourning culture, not through systematic theology, through folk practice. What grandmother did, and her grandmother before her. When railroad magnate Charles Crocker died in San Francisco in 1888, all paintings were turned to the wall. Middle-class families used whatever cloth they could afford. Friends often performed the actual draping, while immediate family attended to their grief. The ritual lasted until after the funeral, when the spirit had supposedly moved on. Only then could mirrors be uncovered again. The covered mirror reveals something profound about Victorian attitudes toward death. That boundary between living and dead? It was permeable, uncertain, requiring active management. The dead didn't disappear into silence. They lingered. Every ritual, from stopped clocks to feet-first body removal to shrouded mirrors, was negotiation with this uncertainty. The living were managing their grief, yes, but they were also managing the dead, helping them leave, protecting themselves from spiritual danger. Victorian literature exploited this anxiety constantly. Carroll's Looking Glass, Wilde's revealing portrait. Today the practice survives most visibly in Jewish Shiva traditions. Some families maintain it without remembering why. Horror films still use covered mirrors as shorthand for death's presence. As you drift toward sleep tonight, consider this: the Victorians who draped their mirrors weren't just superstitious. They were doing what humans always do, finding ways to honor those who left, protect those remaining. The covered mirror said someone we loved has gone. We're not ready to see our reflections yet. Our proof we're still here, and they're not. Sometimes grief requires that acknowledgement. Living with the dead, death's intimate dance with the Victorians. Picture this: a world where death wasn't something that happened in hospitals, behind closed doors, where children grew up watching their siblings die from scarlet fever, where bodies lay in the front parlour for days, and everyone had to walk past them. The Victorians lived with death like we live with smartphones, constant, present, unavoidable. But here's the twist that'll keep you up tonight. They weren't just living with death, they were talking to it. This is the era that gave us seances in fancy drawing rooms, table-tapping parties where socialites would gather to chat with dead relatives like they were catching up over tea. By the 1860s, spiritualism wasn't some fringe belief, it was fashionable. Queen Victoria herself held seances trying to contact Prince Albert after he died. Think about that. The most powerful woman in the world, desperately trying to text message her dead husband through a medium. Death wasn't the end, it was just a change of address. But let's get real about what death actually looked like back then. Infant mortality. 1 in 4 children didn't make it to their first birthday. Cholera could wipe out entire families in a week. Diphtheria would strangle children while their parents watched helplessly. Death wasn't abstract. It had a smell, the sound of rattling breath, the weight of carrying small coffins. Victorian mothers learned to hold back their attachment until kids hit 5 years old, just in case. Death was intimate in ways we can't imagine. So when someone died, the rituals kicked in immediately. Clocks stopped at the exact moment of death. Mirrors covered with black cloth so wandering spirits wouldn't get trapped in their own reflection. Windows opened just a crack, not for fresh air, but to give the soul an exit route. These weren't quaint traditions. These were survival tactics for people who genuinely believed the dead were still hanging around the house. Confused, maybe angry, possibly dangerous. Every ritual was designed to help them leave or protect the living. Here's where it gets really wild. Spiritualism promised that death wasn't goodbye, it was just going to another room. Mediums claimed they could pass messages between worlds like cosmic postal workers. Families would leave empty chairs at dinner tables for dead relatives. Some kept their loved one's bedroom exactly as they left it, expecting visits. The line between living and dead became so blurred that people genuinely didn't know where one world ended and the other began. Death became negotiable. But this intimacy with death came with a price. Victorian ghost stories weren't entertainment, they were documentaries. People reported seeing dead family members so frequently that ghost sightings made it into respectable newspapers. Children grew up expecting to encounter spirits. Death wasn't scary because it was unknown. It was scary because it was known. Too well, the Victorians feared death precisely because they couldn't escape it. It lived in their houses, walked their halls, sat at their tables. This paradox defined an entire era. The more familiar death became, the more mysterious it seemed. The more they tried to communicate with the dead, the more questions arose about what death actually meant. Were the departed happy, angry, lost? The Victorian obsession with death rituals wasn't morbid, it was practical. They were trying to manage a relationship that modern life has taught us to avoid entirely. Death as daily companion, spiritual roommate, unwelcome house guest who simply refused to leave. The silent watchers, mirrors, and their secrets. Picture this. April 1865. Abraham Lincoln's body lies in state in the White House East Room. But something strange is happening. Every mirror in those grand rooms has been covered with white cloth. Not just draped, completely hidden. The servants moved through those rooms right after Lincoln died, covering every reflective surface before his body had even grown cold. This wasn't some special presidential thing. This was just what you did when someone died. Every Victorian household, rich or poor, followed the exact same ritual. The moment death entered a house, the mirrors had to disappear. Black crepe if you could afford it, any old cloth if you couldn't. But why? What were they so afraid of seeing? The Victorians had this belief that the dead person's spirit was still there, wandering the familiar rooms it had known in life. And the mirror, that shining, treacherous surface, was its most dangerous temptation. Let the spirit catch a glimpse of itself in that glass, and it might never leave, it might get trapped there forever. But it wasn't just about trapping the dead. There was another fear, maybe even scarier. If you were still alive and you caught your own reflection in a mirror, where someone had just died, you might be next. The superstition was crystal clear about this. That mirror was already occupied by the dead person's spirit. See yourself in there, and the mirror might claim your reflection as its next victim. People who didn't even believe it still covered their mirrors. Why take chances? The cloth cost nothing. Here's the thing that gets me. This wasn't just some Victorian quirk. Ancient Greeks believed looking at your reflection could invite death, because it captured your soul. Parts of Germany covered anything that shines: windows, polished metal, clocks. This belief shows up in China, India, Madagascar, Romania, Transylvania, completely different cultures, separated by centuries and continents, all terrified of the same thing: mirrors and death. There's something universal here, something that taps into basic human psychology about reflections being both you and not you. In Jewish tradition, they've covered mirrors during Shiva for centuries, still do today. Rabbi Yonatan Eberschutz warned that evil spirits could enter through reflections, especially when a house was already vulnerable from grief. But there were practical reasons too. You can't pray facing a mirror. Looks like you're bowing to yourself. Plus, mirrors represent vanity, self-concern. During mourning, your attention should be on the dead, on loss, on memory, not on how you look. The covered mirror became this powerful symbol of turning away from yourself. The ritual itself was immediate and universal. Death enters the house, curtains get drawn, clocks stop at the exact moment of death, photographs turn face down, and friends of the family move through every room with black cloth. They're transforming an ordinary home into a house of mourning. The mirrors stay covered until after the funeral, until the spirit has moved on. Only then can the family see their own reflections again. Some households kept them covered for weeks, months even, a constant visual reminder of loss. What this tells us about Victorians is profound. For them, the boundary between living and dead was thin, permeable, dangerous. The dead didn't just disappear into silence. They lingered. Every ritual, the covered mirrors, the stopped clocks, carrying bodies out feet first, was about managing that uncertainty, helping the dead leave, protecting the living, establishing clear boundaries between two worlds that felt dangerously close. The mirror held all of this. It said someone we loved has gone, and we're not ready to see proof that we're still here. Touchable grief, rituals determining death's passage. April 1865. Abraham Lincoln's body lies in the White House East Room. Servants move through those grand halls with black fabric, draping every window, every gilded mirror frame. The mirror plates themselves get covered in white crepe. Nobody walking through would catch their own reflection. This wasn't presidential protocol. This was standard practice. The moment someone died in a Victorian home, before the body grew cold, every mirror in the house got covered. Why? Because the dead spirit was still wandering those familiar rooms. Death in a Victorian household triggered an immediate flurry of rituals. Curtains drawn to trap the departing spirit. Clocks stopped at the exact moment of death, freezing time itself. Photographs turned face down to prevent possession. The body carried out feet first, so the dead couldn't look back and beckon loved ones to follow. And every reflective surface, mirrors, polished metal, anything that could catch an image, draped in black crepe or white cloth. These weren't random superstitions. They were a coordinated defense against spiritual danger lurking in familiar rooms. The mirror covering came from a terrifying belief that souls lingered between death and burial, wandering rooms they'd known in life. Mirrors, with their strange power to capture and hold images, were the most dangerous temptation. A confused spirit might glimpse its own reflection and become trapped forever in that silver surface. Even worse, if you caught your own reflection in a house where someone just died, you might be next. The mirror, already haunted by the dead person's spirit, could claim your reflection as its new occupant. Why risk it? This wasn't just Victorian anxiety. Ancient Greeks believed looking at your reflection could invite death, because reflections captured the soul. In Germany and Belgium, they covered anything that shines: windows, clocks, polished metal, because wandering souls might get trapped. This practice appears in China, India, Madagascar, the Dominican Republic, England, Hungary, Romania, every culture, same fear. Because mirrors feel uncanny, they show you yourself but reversed, slightly wrong. A double that might one day refuse to obey. Universal human psychology meeting the mystery of death. Jewish tradition offers the most detailed explanations. During Shiva, the 7-day mourning period, mirrors stay covered for multiple reasons. Rabbi Yonatan Eberschutz warned that departing souls leave voids, emptiness, that evil spirits rush to fill. Houses of mourning become magnets for dark forces. Spirits could enter mirror reflections, attach themselves to grieving families. But there's practical theology too. You can't pray facing a mirror because it looks like worshipping your own image. Mirrors also represent vanity, entirely inappropriate when grief should focus on loss, not self-concern. Victorian families absorbed these traditions through folk practice, not systematic theology. What grandmother did, her grandmother before her. When Charles Crocker died in San Francisco, all paintings turned to walls. Lincoln's White House mirrors got white crepe. Middle-class families used whatever cloth they could afford. The colour mattered, white ribbons for children, symbolising innocence. Black with white for unmarried young adults. Pure black for married adults in life's fullness. Friends often performed the draping while immediate family grieved, transforming ordinary homes into houses of mourning until burial freed the wandering spirit. The covered mirror reveals Victorian attitudes toward death's boundary, permeable, uncertain, requiring active management. The dead didn't disappear into silence. They lingered, wandered, potentially interfered. Every ritual negotiated this uncertainty, helping spirits leave, protecting the living, establishing clear boundaries between dangerously close worlds. That draped mirror communicated to every visitor, this is a house of death. Different rules apply, normal life suspended. It gave visible form to overwhelming grief, transformed private loss into public declaration. A ritual that said, someone we loved has gone. Surface of aeons, mirrors and their timeless tale. Here's something that'll mess with your head. Every culture on Earth, and I mean every single one, has weird beliefs about mirrors. Ancient Greeks thought your reflection could steal your soul. Germans covered every shiny surface when someone died. Jewish families still drape mirrors during mourning periods today. Victorians believed dead spirits got trapped in mirror glass. Different continents, different centuries, same fear. What is it about seeing ourselves reflected that freaks out humanity so completely? Tonight we're going through the looking glass. Let's start with ancient Greece. They had this wild idea that your reflection wasn't just an image, it was actually part of your soul made visible. Think about that for a second. Every time you looked in water or polished bronze, you were literally seeing your soul staring back. And souls, according to Greek belief, were fragile things, vulnerable. If something happened to your reflection, if it got disturbed or trapped, your actual soul could be damaged. Death could follow. So Greek women avoided looking at their reflections during certain moon phases. Too risky. Jump ahead to medieval Germany and Belgium. Same paranoia, different rules. When someone died, families didn't just cover mirrors. They covered everything that could possibly reflect. Windows, polished pots, clock faces, even puddles of water, if they could manage it. Why? Because they believed the dead person's spirit was still wandering around the house for days after death, and any shiny surface, any reflection at all, could trap that spirit permanently, keep it from moving on to whatever comes next. The whole house became a potential prison for the dead. Jewish tradition took this even further. During Shiva, that's the 7-day mourning period, mirrors get covered with cloth. Still happens today. The Kabbalists had a particularly creepy explanation for this. They said when someone dies, they leave behind a spiritual void, an emptiness. And evil spirits are drawn to that emptiness, like moths to flame. Mirrors, being these mysterious portal-like objects, made it easier for dark forces to slip through and attach themselves to the grieving family. Cover the mirrors, block the doorway. Pretty smart, actually. But here's where it gets really interesting. Victorians combined all these ancient fears into their own elaborate death rituals. When Abraham Lincoln died in 1865, White House servants immediately draped every mirror in white cloth before his body even left the bedroom. This wasn't special presidential treatment. This was standard practice in every Victorian home. The dead spirit might see its own reflection and get confused, think it was still alive, refuse to leave, and if a living person caught their reflection in a death house mirror, they'd be next to die. What is it about mirrors that triggers this universal human anxiety? Maybe it's because reflections are fundamentally weird. You're looking at yourself, but not really yourself. It's reversed, slightly delayed, a version of you that exists only in glass and silver. Victorian writers understood this creepiness perfectly. Lewis Carroll sent Alice through the looking glass into another world. Oscar Wilde made Dorian Gray's portrait, essentially a mirror of his soul, reveal his true corrupted nature. Mirrors show us things we're not sure we want to see. The Altered Abode, Mourning's impression on Victorian homes. Death didn't just take a person, it transformed the entire house. The moment someone drew their last breath, an army of hands moved through familiar rooms with black cloth and solemn purpose. Every mirror covered, every bright surface draped. The home you knew yesterday became something else entirely, a shrine, a monument, a place where normal life simply stopped. And the rules for this transformation, they were as strict as they were heartbreaking. Everything depended on who had died. The transformation began before the body had even grown cold. Servants or family members moved through every room with ruthless efficiency, curtains drawn tight against daylight. Clocks stopped at the exact moment of death, photographs turned face down, and then came the cloth. Endless yards of black crepe for married adults, white ribbons for children, mixed black and white for unmarried young people. The house had to match the loss, had to reflect the exact nature of what had been taken away. Nothing could remain unchanged. The rituals were intricate beyond belief. Door knockers wrapped in crepe so visitors approached in muffled silence. Parlour furniture rearranged to accommodate the coffin. Fresh flowers banished because their bright colours felt obscene next to grief. Instead, artificial flowers, wax fruits, anything that wouldn't remind you of life still blooming elsewhere. Even the servants changed their appearance. Black armbands, subdued voices, everything in the house had to acknowledge death's presence, had to show proper respect, had to prove the family understood the magnitude of their loss. But here's what's fascinating. The family didn't do this work themselves. They couldn't. Grief made them useless for practical tasks. So friends stepped in, moving through the house like a gentle invasion force. They knew what needed doing without being asked. Draping mirrors while the widow wept. Covering paintings while children stood confused in doorways. Transforming a home into a proper house of mourning. It was an act of love. Taking care of the details so the bereaved could fall apart completely. Someone had to manage the theatre of grief. Normal life didn't just pause, it vanished entirely. No music, no laughter, no bright conversation. Meals served in hushed tones, if at all. Social visits became solemn rituals of condolence. Business postponed. Letters answered in black ink on black-bordered paper. The house became a world apart from the living, breathing city outside. Time moved differently here. Minutes stretched like hours. Days blurred together in a haze of calling cards and funeral arrangements. The home had become a monument to someone who was no longer there to see it. The emotional weight was staggering. Imagine living inside your own grief made visible. Every draped surface a reminder. Every covered mirror reflecting your inability to see yourself clearly anymore. The house held the family's sorrow like a vessel, containing it, giving it shape and form. Children whispered in hallways that had once echoed with their laughter. Spouses moved through rooms that felt like shrines to shared memories. The physical transformation mirrored the internal one, everything familiar made strange by absence. These beliefs haven't disappeared. Walk into a Jewish home during Shiva today, and you'll still find mirrors covered with cloth. Horror movies still use draped mirrors as shorthand for supernatural danger. We've kept the fear even as we've forgotten most of the original reasons. Maybe because deep down we still feel it, that uncanny sense that the person looking back at us from the mirror isn't quite who we think it is. Sweet dreams. Try not to think about your reflection tonight, or who might be looking back, and slowly, very slowly, life would return. Mirrors uncovered one by one, clocks wound and set to the correct time. Curtains opened to let daylight back in. The house exhaled, released from its suspended state, but it was never quite the same. Rooms held echoes of those dark weeks. Corners remembered the weight of grief. The Victorian home didn't just shelter the living, it honoured the dead, contained mourning, and then helped families find their way back to something resembling normal life. Architecture as healing, space as ceremony. Through the looking glass, society's relationship with the dead. April 1865. The White House. Abraham Lincoln's body lies in the East Room, and servants move through the great halls with black fabric and white crepe. Every mirror gets covered, every single one, because in Victorian America, when someone died, you had maybe 20 minutes before the spirit started wandering. And mirrors, those were the most dangerous thing in the house. The dead could get trapped in them, or worse, they could trap you. This wasn't just White House protocol. This was what everyone did. Think about living in a world where death wasn't hidden away in hospitals, where your grandmother died in the front parlour, your baby brother in the nursery upstairs, where cholera could take half a family in a week. Victorians didn't just know death, they lived with it, touched it, sat with it for days. But that intimacy, it made the mystery more terrifying, not less. If death was so present, so real, what if the dead were still present too? What if they never actually left the rooms they'd loved? The moment someone died, the rituals began instantly. Stop the clocks at the exact time of death. Draw all the curtains so the spirit can't escape too quickly through windows. Turn the photographs face down. Carry the body out feet first so they can't look back, and beckon family members to follow. And cover every mirror in the house with black cloth before the body was even cold. Every culture had some version of this. Ancient Greeks believed reflections captured souls. Jewish families still cover mirrors during Shiva today. But here's what gets me about Victorian mirror covering. Nobody could agree on exactly why they did it. Some said the dead spirit might see its reflection and get confused, not realize it had died. Others believed the mirror could trap the soul in its silver depths forever. Then there was this terrifying idea that if you, still living, caught your own reflection in a mirror where someone had just died, you'd be next. The mirror had already claimed one soul. Why not collect another? The explanations kept shifting, but the fear stayed constant. Because mirrors are inherently creepy, right? They show you yourself but reversed, always slightly wrong. Victorian literature was obsessed with this idea. Lewis Carroll sent Alice through the looking glass into another world entirely. Oscar Wilde made Dorian Gray's portrait reveal his hidden corruption. Mirrors weren't just reflective surfaces, they were portals, thresholds between the world you could see and whatever might be lurking just behind it. The covered mirror became this perfect symbol of Victorian grief management. It said, "Someone we loved is gone, and we're not ready to see our own faces yet." It told every visitor this was a house where different rules applied now. Normal life was suspended. The ordinary world had to be transformed to match the devastation people felt inside. White cloth for children, black for adults. The colours told you who had died before you even asked. What's beautiful about this ritual It gave grief a physical form, made the invisible visible. The Victorians understood something we've forgotten. When someone dies, everything changes. The mirrors can't just go on reflecting whatever stands before them, like nothing happened. Everything has happened. The cloth acknowledged it, said, "We see you, death, we respect you, but we're going to manage this our way." That's not superstition. That's love taking whatever form it needs to survive. A shrouded reflection. Echo of loving remembrance. So what did it all mean? This ritual that swept through Victorian homes like clockwork, covering every mirror the moment death entered. It wasn't just superstition, it was something deeper, a tangible way to hold three impossible things at once: respect for the departed, protection for the living, and grief itself made visible, made real. The covered mirror became a kind of shrine, not to worship, but to acknowledge. Someone we loved is gone. The world has changed. Our reflections can't pretend otherwise. Think about what that black cloth really represented. It was a boundary marker, a line drawn between the world of the living and whatever came after. But more than that, it was tenderness. The Victorians understood something we've maybe forgotten. That grief needs space to exist. Physical space, visible space. When you covered the mirrors, you were saying, "This house holds sorrow now. Normal rules don't apply here. Even your own reflection, especially your own reflection, doesn't belong until we've learned how to keep living without them." And the protection angle, that wasn't just folklore either. It was psychology dressed up in spiritual language, because there's something genuinely unsettling about seeing yourself in the mirror when someone you love has just died. You look the same, but everything's different. Your face betrays nothing of the earthquake happening inside. The Victorians knew that disconnect could break you, so they covered the mirrors, not to protect you from wandering spirits, but to protect you from the cruelty of your own unchanged reflection staring back. This isn't just history, by the way. Walk into a Jewish home during Shiva today, and you'll still find the mirrors covered. The practice survived because it works. It serves something essential in human nature. The modern explanations are different, preventing vanity during mourning, avoiding improper prayer positions. But underneath, it's the same instinct. Grief needs ritual, loss needs form, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is temporarily remove your own reflection from the world. Let the absence speak for itself. Our relationship with mirrors hasn't gotten less complicated, has it? Horror movies still use covered mirrors as shorthand for the presence of death. We still feel that uncanny valley effect when we catch our reflection unexpectedly. That sense that the person in the mirror might not obey, might reveal something we don't want to see. The Victorians weren't uniquely superstitious. They were just more honest about the fact that mirrors make us uneasy. They held mysteries we couldn't quite solve. Still do. That fundamental question, who's really looking at whom? Here's what strikes me about all this. We've professionalized death now, moved it to hospitals, funeral homes, places with trained staff and proper equipment. We don't lay bodies out in the front parlour anymore, don't stop the clocks or cover the mirrors. And maybe we've gained something: less trauma, cleaner boundaries. But maybe we've lost something too. That immediate, physical, ritualistic way of saying, everything has changed now. Everything, even the mirrors need to know it. Even our reflections need to respect it. So tonight, as you close your eyes, think about this. Every culture, every generation has had to figure out how to hold the weight of loving someone who's gone. The Victorians chose black cloth and silver mirrors. We choose photo albums and social media profiles. Different tools, same impossible task. Learning how to keep loving someone you can't see, can't touch, can't protect. The covered mirror was just one answer to an eternal question. How do you honor the space someone used to fill? How do you hold absence like presence? Carefully, tenderly, together.